Welcome back, everyone. I'm the Bella Gamer, and today we're talking about the Mystic from Starfinder 2E. Obviously, by the thumbnail, but still, I wanted to make special mention that, if these videos slow down, it's only because they're full class reviews and life gets a little busy this time of year. So, just so you know. Also, I want to thank Paizo for sending me a copy of Starfinder 2E for review, though this isn't paid content. They're not paying me to make this video. So all thoughts and opinions here are my own. Obviously, as you probably know from some of my prior videos. All right, so the Mystic. Interesting class, especially for people who've played Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Now, as I said before, I'm not going to be comparing this class necessarily to Pathfinder classes, especially for people who aren't going to play Pathfinder, are just interested in Starfinder. That would be kind of weird, but I will make some mentions of it because the Mystic feels like a weird mix of the Druid, Cleric, and Bard, potentially anyway, from Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Now, it isn't nearly to the same degree that any of those classes are, but has some interesting features. But the Mystic is essentially a caster whose primary focus is kind of just being like the team resource manager in a way. They have a feature that we'll get into in a little bit that kind of helps manage the HP of the group. And they have all kind of features to kind of keep everyone interconnected in some really interesting ways. I actually really like how the Mystic plays because it's a very support style that isn't just like, say, a cleric in games, not even Pathfinder necessarily, where your whole job is just to keep everyone alive. Mystic kind of has that, but it kind of branches off in very interesting ways. So let's go ahead and take a look at their key attribute, which is Wisdom. This is pretty okay. I mean, this applies to your will saves, which is really good, but there's not a lot of skills that use Wisdom. So the predominant thing you're going to be getting out of this stat is mostly just your spellcasting modifier, which is very important in your spell DCs, as well as just having a really good will save, and then the occasional skill that is based on Wisdom, which medicine is one, so that's an important thing to keep in mind. They also have 6 plus con modifier HP per level. That is a very low amount of HP, making the Mystic very vulnerable to just being killed outright by being attacked. So your team really needs to focus on kind of protecting you, and that's honestly going to be to their benefit because you're going to be able to keep them alive the longer you're alive. This also means that the Mystic honestly is going to be playing really far in the back, but they have features that really work with this. And as well, this is the first spellcaster I've talked about for Starfinder 2E. And in fact, there's only 2 in the book so far, though I know there's another one coming soon. So just so you know, spellcasters are balanced kind of differently than martial characters because a lot of your class features are technically your spells, and in this case, a spell repertoire, which I'll explain in a little bit. So if we don't see as many cool general class features like the Solarium, for instance, it's because you're a caster and you can essentially get class features that you choose from a massive spell list. So yeah. Moving on to their proficiencies, we see here that they're trained only into simple weapons. They're not really going to be using weapons all that much. You're mostly going to be casting spells, and you're trained only up to light armor. So having as much dex as you can is going to give you at least that much more survivability. But honestly, if we're talking about builds for Mystic, you're probably just going to want to focus Wisdom, followed by your Constitution modifier, and then your dexterity as high as you can manage. Every other set isn't quite as important. Maybe some intelligence if you want more skill proficiencies. But other than that, those are going to be your primary stats. Moving on to our other proficiencies, we are only trained in perception, and we have only expert in will saves, where in many of the other classes we've seen so far, you get 2 saving throws at expert proficiency. This just kind of very much leans into the fact that the Mystic is a lot more vulnerable of a class because they have so many features. So kind of one of the balancing points of being the Mystic is they're just easier to kill. So you want to play super far back, as I mentioned before. Also, when it comes to skills, we get one skill determined by essentially our subclass, and then a number of additional skills equal to 3 plus our intelligence modifier, which is pretty standard fare, if I'm going to be honest. So, moving on, let's talk about their core feature, because this is going to lean into literally everything else the class does. This is the core thing for playing a Mystic, and that's the Vitality Network. So, talking about Vitality Network, I really got to talk about like what the Mystic is in the Starfinder 2e setting. So, the Mystic has this kind of interesting connection to other people. You form bonds with your allies. You can form bonds with essentially up to 10 willing creatures, and many of your bond features are going to help them. So, it's a very big support feature. And this also is like this kind of psychic, almost computer matrixy kind of thing. It depends on what subpaths you really take. It's very, very interesting, but just know that you kind of tap into like a galactic subconscious in a way, or you could think of it as like a different dimension of thought and feeling that you tap into your powers. So Vitality Network taps into this for the sake of giving HP. So when you start off, you have 6 plus 4 hit points per level. So every level you get 4 more hit points to this total, meaning you start off at 10, and then, you know, at second level, you have 14, third, 18. And these are just hit points that you're going to be able to essentially disperse to your allies throughout combat. And in order to kind of keep this feature up, because to be honest, 10 HP, even at level 1, well, it is a lot. It's not a lot over the course of an entire day. Well, during combat scenarios, you actually regenerate these points at a rate of 4 hit points per round starting off. But when you get to Master Spell DC, which is at level 15, it jumps up to 6. And at level 19, it jumps up to 8. So effectively, for the majority of the game, it's going to be 4 hit points per level. Per round. And then, of course, you get 4 hit points per level as you increase. And that never changes. So towards the end of the game, you have 86 points unless you take a feat at level 20, which I'll talk about later. So 86 total HP in this pool is a lot. But the thing is, when you use the actual skill transfer vitality, which I'll show here, you can transfer to begin with only 10 hit points at a time. So when you start off, that's pretty much all you got. And then at levels 5, 10, 15, and 20, this increases by an additional 10 up to a maximum of 50 hit points. So it kind of scales in a way where you're eventually going to have more in the network than you can possibly spend in a round, unless you take some other features. So you have a very consistent amount of HP, and you can really consider that your team has whatever you start with plus 4 HP per round to your total HP pool in combat. So just by having a Mystic on your team's effective health just increases, which is really, really good. And it's the core feature of the Mystic because it really leans into how their subclasses work. So you have what's called a connection. And this is like your connection to a particular mystical force. It's specific to each type of subclass, more or less. So I'm going to use rhythm here as an example because honestly it's the smallest one and fits on the screen a little bit easier. But rhythm, so you feel the song that moves the stars, channeling this cosmic beat through the power of audible rhythm and universal vibrations, known by many as the Song of the Spheres. Very cool lore-wise, but what does this actually do? So when you pick your connection at level 1, it gives you a connection skill, which is a skill you just get trained proficiency in right away, which we see here is performance. It also gives you what type of spells you cast. Now, in Starfinder 2e, at least at this time, there's 4 primary spell groups. There's Arcane, Divine, Primal, and Occult. The Mystic has access to 3 of these. And in Rhythm's case, it's a primal spell list that you get access to. So when you add spells to your list, which is something I'll talk about in a little bit, you pick from the primal spell list. The other ones that the Mystic has access to are Divine and Occult. So you can't cast arcane spells, at least at base, with a Mystic, but that's not typically a problem, as all the spell lists are pretty good. So in addition to the connection skill that we also get our connection spells. So this is a cantrip that we know in addition to 4 other cantrips we know at level 1. And then as we gain more levels, we'll get access to new spell ranks. And with each spell rank, we get a new spell automatically added to our list that we can then use. These are just additional spells on top of the ones you get to pick, which is a really good feature. Then we have Epiphany spells. Now, Epiphany spells are a type of focus spell. Focus spells are unique because you use a different type of resource than a spell slot, which is something you may be more familiar with. Again, I'll get to spells in a little bit, but each of the different subclasses here, the different connections, have really unique Epiphany spells that are really good. And I actually want to make special mention of Rhythms, which is Anthem. Now, if you played Pathfinder 2nd Edition, this will look very similar because Courageous Anthem does more or less the same thing because it gives you a status bonus to attack rolls, damage rolls, and you gain a bonus to saves against effects that cause Fascinated or Confused. In Pathfinder, it was, I believe, Frightened or Fear conditions. Regardless, doesn't really matter for this game. Just know this is a really good effect. It has a 60-foot emanation, and you can sustain this for up to a round. So you spend a focus point to use essentially this one action spell that everyone within 60 feet of you gets a bonus to hit and to their damage and a save against particular saves. This is a very powerful effect. 60 feet is also a massive emanation range, so that's really, really good. And so just having a rhythm connection mystic is going to be good because you get the healing of having a mystic in addition to this really good buff. And of course, each of these connections, as well as you can see, have additional epiphany spells. Though these other spells you don't get automatically as you level, you need to select feats in order to pick them up. Then we have the Harmony and Perfect Harmony. So when you start off, you get access to the Harmony at level 1. So for Rhythm, when you transfer Vitality, that feature we talked about before, you can extend the duration of an active epiphany from the Rhythm connection by 1 round. So that sustain spell, which if you're unfamiliar with how it works, sustaining uses an action on your round very typically. With Rhythm, as long as we use Transfer Vitality, which is our core feature and we're probably going to be using a lot, we get to essentially sustain that spell without sustaining it for an additional round, which is really good, and it really helps with our action economy. Then at Perfect Harmony, which is a level 19 feature, so something you're mostly not going to get to use, the first time each round you would transfer Vitality, the target who regained hit points can stride as a free action, and this gains the traversal trait. That's really, really good. And each of these Mystic connections have some really cool features. And while I'm not necessarily going to go into each of these, obviously you can read them for yourself. The different connections that we have in the game are Akashik, which is very information-based, and I like a lot of their features. In fact, for Akashik specifically, I really like their advanced epiphany spell, which is called Akashik Assistant. You get this little assistant, like ghost, essentially, that aids an ally or yourself with a pretty substantial bonus. That's really good, actually. It's a very solid feature. Then we have Elemental, which Elemental I want to make special mention of is the only one that gains an additional, essentially, general feat. With Elemental connection, you gain the shield block general feat. This is a great one because while you're wielding a shield and your shield is raised, you can use a reaction to reduce the damage you get hit by an amount equal to the shield's hardness. And Elemental is really cool as a general connection because it allows you to essentially equip your allies with elemental weapons and shields, which is kind of cool. Then we have Healing, and Healing is really powerful predominantly because it gives us additional healing features. Infusion, its particular Epiphany spell, is just an additional heal spell that we can get as a focus spell. And what makes this one really cool, and it would be very familiar for those who play Pathfinder 2nd edition as well, it's essentially just the heal spell. So you can spend between 1 and 3 actions. The more actions you spend, the essentially further the range is, and the greater the overall healing effect. So at 1 action, it's a touch spell, but at 2 actions, you can affect a target within 30 feet, and you increase the healing by an additional flat 6 points. So at base, a d6 plus 6. And for 3 actions, you can just do the base roll without the additional HP to every creature in a 30-foot emanation. Really good as long as you're surrounded mostly by your allies. And with every spell rank you get after this, so essentially every odd level, this increases by an additional d6 base HP, and the 2 action gains an additional 6 flat, making this or transfer vitality feature a lot more extra healing for a focus point. Now, I already talked about rhythm and why it's good, so last but not least, we'll talk about Shadow. And Shadow's particularly interesting because at the perfect harmony level, which is again not one you're going to get to use a lot, you actually gain just an additional feature called Umbral Stride. Once per round, you can just teleport from shadow to shadow, and in addition to this, the target of your transfer vitality can use this action until the end of their next turn, so giving your allies the ability to transfer between shadows as well. Again, it's a level 19 feature, so we're not going to see it too much, but that's very powerful. So let's talk about spellcasting. For many of you who have played Pathfinder before, you might want to skip this section here, but for those who are new, so spellcasters. A spellcaster gains spells that they can use using spell slots, and we have this handy chart here to tell us how many spells we get. So at level 1, we know 5 cantrips, 4 we get to pick, and 1 that we get from our connection. And we know 3 first level spells, 2 of which we get to pick, and 1 also from our connection. Now, the Mystic is a repertoire spellcaster, and this is the preferred spellcasting in Starfinder and Pathfinder, I'm assuming as well, because you don't have to plan your spells ahead of time. So there's 2 predominant types of spellcasters. There's repertoire casters, where you pretty much gain access to all the spells you know every day, just at all times. And then there's prepared spellcasters who have a much bigger spell list that they can essentially swap in what spells they want every day, but they have to prepare every single slot. So if you want to use Fireball twice in a day, you have to prepare 2 slots of Fireball, where a repertoire caster has to know Fireball, but then can use their spell slots. As long as they have a spell slot available, they can use Fireball. Now, one thing with repertoire casters, though, is you have to know the spell at each level. So if you wanted to cast Fireball as a 3rd rank spell, for instance, and you also want to cast it at a 4th rank or 5th rank spell, you need to know Fireball at each of those levels. So of the spells you know, which is equal to the spells that you can cast. So for instance, when we're at 5th level, we know 4 first level spells, 4 second level spells, and 3 third level spells. Each of those spells that we can cast are also spells that we know, essentially, unless we take some additional features. So if we wanted to have multiple fireballs at different spell ranks, like a 3rd rank spell and a 4th rank spell, what we need to know Fireball essentially twice, meaning we have less overall spell diversity in order to make use of a spell at different power levels, more or less. Now, this feature is made a bit easier with something called signature spells, which is something that we pick up at 3rd level. So a signature spell essentially is at each spell rank that we know, we select a spell of that rank. So for instance, at the first rank when we pick this up, when we pick this up, we'll select a first rank spell and we'll select a second rank spell. Now, these spells become our signature spells, meaning that we can heighten them without needing to learn them. So if I pick a first rank like Fear spell, I can now cast it as a second rank spell without learning second rank Fear, if that makes any sense. So signature spells, essentially, if we have a spell that we want to use at multiple ranks, we can use it without taking up our overall spell diversity down, right? If that makes sense. It's very easy to use repertoire casting because essentially, if you know Fireball and you have 4 spell slots, you can cast Fireball 4 times, no worries about it. That's essentially all you really need to know. It's a very good use of spellcasting and the most preferred type of spellcasting in the game because you don't need to try to figure out and try to big brain how many times you're going to use each spell in a day. And this allows you to more flexibly know like utility spells, but only need to use them if you're in a situation where you're not using all your combat spell slots, essentially. When you have a prepared caster, you kind of take up some of your offensive capability by preparing utility spells. So repertoire casters are honestly better at having some utility spells just because if they need to, they can use those slots for combat spells if the situation requires. And I'll also tack onto this focus spells. So I mentioned focus spells before. So every time you learn a new focus spell, like through feats, for instance, you gain an additional focus point to your maximum focus point. So you start off as a mystic with 1 focus point, and then when you pick up another feat or feature that gives you another focus spell, now you have 2 focus points that you can use for each spell individually or to use on one spell twice. And you can have a maximum of 3 focus points. In addition to this, when you take a 10-minute rest, you can refocus. This gives you back 1 focus point every 10 minutes. So if you blow all your focus points in a fight, you're going to have to rest for a good amount of time to get all those points back. And in addition to when these points get refocused, your vitality network will also refresh as well. Or your vitality network technically doesn't restore the HP unless you're in combat or if you refocus. And when you refocus, you restore all of your vitality network. So focus spells are going to be a predominant feature for you as a mystic. And these spells are just in addition to your normal spell slots. So your focus spells have a different resource that you use, but you don't have to worry about using your spell slots for your focus spells. But you can't use your focus spells using normal spell slots and vice versa. So that might be a lot, and you'll need to play the game a little bit to kind of figure it out. But overall, Mystic is a pretty good spellcaster because you don't need to plan a bunch of extra head, and they have really good focus spells that you can use that gives you more magic essentially that you can use. Now that we're all done with the spells, let's talk about their other noticeable class features. Also here at level 3, we have group chat. This is incredibly useful. So essentially, all the creatures in your bond gain a 120-foot range telepathy, essentially, which is nuts. So that pretty much you and all your party members can just mentally talk to each other just whenever you want without any special actions or anything like that. That's absolutely insane. There's so much utility in the ability to actively communicate without verbally doing so, and 120-foot range is really big, but that's not the only thing about group chat that's really good. They also know, everyone knows the general present state, general direction, and whether each other is conscious, unconscious, dying, or dead. Now, this is actually something I didn't mention with the connections earlier, or rather the Mystic Bond earlier. Mystic Bonds gives you this pretty much same feature at level 1. It's just only you know everything. And as well, you also know a creature's hit point total. So you know the numeric value of hit points. Now, I don't know how that comes across in lore, in world, but I've always just assumed that hit points represent a character's like overall state. So like a character who's trained in medicine or heals for a living would be able to roughly guess how much damage someone has in relation to their total hit points. So that's how I would do it. But Mystic Bond gives you their HP total, and while group chat doesn't, it gives pretty much everything else, which is really, really good. And you gain access to a new action called Network Spell. This essentially allows you to spell shape, which is just manipulate one of your spells for an additional action. So essentially a spell you're casting now has 3 actions rather than 2, or at least typically, to do something different. And in this case, Network Spell allows you to cast another spell from the position of one of your bonded allies, as long as you both have line of sight and line of effect to the effect. Now, this can be potentially used to trick someone to think that your ally is spellcasting, but you're doing all the magic stuff, and unless you're using a subtle spell, which, a spell that has these subtle traits, they're going to be able to tell as long as they can see you both. But they can only see one of your allies, which again, this is a up to essentially line of sights for you. So there's a lot of ways that you could easily do this. Standing up on a building, watching everything going, like in an apartment, while your ally is down on a street doing something like that. You have your binoculars out and you can use the spell, yada, yada. Though technically you would need an open window, but still, it's because line of effect, obviously. And if you're not familiar, so line of sight is obvious, but line of effect is there's no barriers of any kind between you and the target as well. So Network Spell is very interesting. And I think the major reason why I like this one is it allows you to essentially cheat the range of your spells, which is really good. Now, granted, again, it's an extra action, but with Network Spell, you really don't need Reach Spell, which is a feat we can pick up, which is very interesting. But yeah, so overall, the Mystic is very solid in a group setting, obviously. But group chat, really, I like it because it can be used for things not necessarily combat related, which I'm always happy to see. And especially in a setting like Starfinder 2E's, I feel like that's going to be exceptionally good. And the fact that your entire team is kind of in on the gig here is really solid. Now, your normal Mystic Bond doesn't have a range normally. So for your allies, the 120-foot range is just like a reduced version. But still, it's really, really good. I really like it. Now, sadly, the only other really notable class feature we have is Perfect Harmony, which is at 19th level, which I kind of already talked about, which gives us our Perfect Harmony. We also get Transcendence at level 19 as well, which gives us a 10th level spell. And if you're unfamiliar with how these games work, a 10th rank spell is the highest level spell, and these are like the reality altering ultra powerful spells. So essentially your strongest spell you get at level 19, and you only get 1 slot for it unless you take a level 20 feat that gives you another slot. So that's kind of the basic features of the Mystic. Let's talk about some of their feats, as I always tend to do. Now, the Mystic is kind of simple when it comes to their overall feat paths, as I've mentioned in prior videos. So most classes have a few feat paths that kind of give a very clear line of design choice for each class. The Mystic is somewhat similar, but it's kind of in 2 major categories, but one of those categories is in a subcategory by itself. So one of those categories is based on what type of casting you can do and what kind of connection you have. So for instance, Divine Bond here allows you to pick a god, and you essentially treat that god as the pure source of your power. You're bound by their anathema, and you can't go really beyond the deity's teachings. And you gain a trained proficiency in that deity's skill or preferred skill, which if you were already trained, then you become trained in another skill of your choice. And in addition to this, when you look at their cleric spells, which is very interesting, it mentions cleric spells here because Starfinder 2e doesn't have clerics. So cleric is such a weird term because, like, I understand, right? Pathfinder 2e exists, clerics there exist, and, you know, gods have clerics and, like, but Starfinder 2e doesn't natively have clerics, which is strange. But anyway, you take the cleric spells and you add them automatically to your spell list of spells that you can choose and your spell repertoire as well. So this gives you more spells that you can cast, but you don't gain additional spell slots. And not only that, but these spells are automatically signature spells in addition to the signature spells you select at each of these ranks. So you get multiple skill or signature spells and more spell variety for your spell list. Divine Bond is really good, and all that requires is that your connection is a divine spellcasting connection. We also, at the same level, at level 1, which, by the way, casters don't get level 1 feats. They are a caster, they get spells at first level, so they don't get a feat choice until level 2. This is more for the sake and purposes for multi-class archetyping, but just know at level 2, obviously, you can select level 1 feats. Anyway, Xeno Druid. So again, we have another class that doesn't exist, Druid feature here. And the interesting thing about Xeno Druid Bond is, well, one, you need a primal spellcasting connection, obviously. And then you choose a Xeno Druidic order, and you become trained in that order's listed skill, and you add their listed spells. It's essentially the same thing as Divine Bond, but in the primal sense. In roleplay-wise, you are kind of a part of Xeno Druids, which doesn't make sense because, because Xeno means, like, not from this world, more or less. And Xeno Druids would be just druids from any other world than, I don't know. It doesn't make sense to me as a form of terminology, but it's the same thing as Divine Bond. You know, my hangups aside, it's the same thing, though it does give you a lore skill rather than just a skill proficiency. So lore skills, if you're unfamiliar, are better for recall knowledge actions. Recall knowledge allows you to essentially know things about a particular creature. So if we take a look at the animal order, for instance, we gain animal lore. So when we make a recall knowledge check on animals, rather than using nature, we would be better off using animal lore because that would reduce the DC essentially to succeed the check. And it gives us a higher chance of getting more information for critting the check. So Xeno Druid is interesting. And these are like just a few of the types of feats that go towards particular connections that you made at the very beginning of the game. And then we have a slew of bond-related feats that affect your allies or affects how you use transfer vitality. And that's actually a lot of the feats here. So I'm going to make special mention of extended vitality. This allows you to use transfer vitality to any bonded ally as long as they're on the same planet as you. So if your ally is in trouble somewhere like on the other side of the planet, you can use your vitality on, or your transfer vitality on them, though you're not considered to be in combat. So you don't get the regeneration that you normally do. But at higher levels, you get a lot of extra vitality. And if that ally is the only one like in the combat scenario, you can buff their HP by like 50 points pretty easy. So extended vitality, I think, is very solid and is very useful in many ways. And as I kind of mentioned with the shadow connection, when you get the umbral jump, that allows the ally to essentially use that feature because you used your transfer vitality on them, which is one of the few situations where you can actually give additional abilities across the width of a planet, which is insane. We also have a Radiant Bond, which is another really cool feat, where whenever you transfer vitality, rather than targeting a singular ally, we can target any number of our allies, though the total amount of HP we can transfer per round doesn't change. But I really like Radiant Bond because this allows you to, essentially, if your allies get hit by area attacks or over the course of a round, just multiple allies get hit, this allows you to kind of divvy up HP as you see fit. And honestly, as your transfer vitality increases in level and you can just transfer more and more HP, I mean, like, eventually you can do 50 HP, which you can divide pretty well amongst, like a whole party of players. So Radiant Bond is really, really solid. And we can even use our vitality network in very interesting ways, like with the feat Network Shield, which is a reaction that we can take whenever we're hit by an attack, where we essentially gain resistance equal to twice our level against the damage, though we take the amount we resist. So for instance, at this level, 6th level, we would use this. We would resist up to 12 damage, which is a lot, but that would also remove 12 HP from our vitality network. So that's something to keep in mind, but relatively speaking, right? Damage mitigated is damage you don't need to heal. So it pretty much does the same thing and technically can bypass how much vitality you can transfer in a round. So Network Shield is very, very good. And then, of course, like every other class, we also have some additional features or some additional feats that allow us to do some other really cool things that don't necessarily fit into those two kind of amorphous bubbles. One of which is adaptive defense. So for an action as a spell shape, so as long as the next action we're about to take is to cast a spell, and that spell does need to do damage, one of your bonded allies and yourself gain resistance to that spell's type of damage equal to the spell's rank. So if it's a 2nd rank spell, that would be a 2 damage resistance. Not a lot, but it's something. And you get that resistance until the end of your next turn, which is really good. Now, if the spell does multiple types of damage, you just pick which type of damage it is. But adaptive defense is really good if you're going off against some kind of elemental enemy that maybe like a fire spell for, so you can use a fire spell that does damage, which might not be good against fire elemental enemies, who knows, and then gain resistance to fire, which can be helpful. But I see adaptive defense more as a kind of a pseudo permission to blow your allies up with your spells, because you can at least give one of them some resistance to the damage. Not a lot of resistance, but it's something, and depending on the scenario, this could be a really effective use. I always love features like this that kind of just extend how you can use certain spells by at least reducing some of the negative aspects of using, say, an area spell in a small space. But yeah, I like adaptive defense a lot. And then we have cloud storage, which is also really cool, where it's essentially you have an extra dimensional space that you can put objects of 1 bulk or less into. And you can store a number of objects in this space up to 12 bulk, which is a lot. And then any creature in your bond on the same plane, so even on a different planet, can reach into this space for 2 actions and pull that object out. And the maximum bulk can increase as you level up, getting to eventually to 75 bulk at level 16, which is way more than you're ever going to need, especially considering that they are 1 bulk or less. But if you have any good healing items or anything like that, cloud storage is a really good way to transfer them to your allies. And I kind of mentioned this before, but with the network spell feature that I mentioned before and stuff like cloud storage, you can see how the Mystic can stay so far out of combat, or at least not in a danger zone in combat, while still being rather effective in a combat scenario. And it allows the Mystic to essentially just do other things as necessary and still be useful to their team. Now, of course, you're still going to want to be with your allies when you're going into combat scenarios, but still, you could be way on the other side of a plaza or something while your allies are doing most of the work, and you can still cast spells, use your transfer vitality feature, and if you're relatively close enough as well, telepathically communicate with your allies things you see. making the Mystic an incredibly safe, incredibly helpful ally to have in a lot of situations. Now, the last feat I want to make mention of is Enlightenment. Now, this is a level 20 feat, so of course you're not going to get to use it for that long during your games, probably. But as long as you have legendary proficiency in your connection skill, your Vitality Network's maximum increases to 200, which is insane. And now you regain 20 HP per round rather than 8, which is what you would at this level. And you can bond with any number of willing creatures. Enlightenment is probably just the best level 20 feat you can select. The other one gives you a level 10 spell slot, which is okay. But this is insane. 20 HP per round. Every round of combat, your party essentially has 20 more HP. Insane. And just a max capacity of 200 HP that when you take a short rest and just, refocus spells for 10 minutes, you can get 200 HP that you can utilize back is an insanely powerful utility feature. The Mystic is incredibly powerful. It's a very good caster just in general, and it has so much dynamics and versatility that pretty much any group could use a Mystic, which is very solid. So, yeah, let me know your thoughts about the Mystic down below. I'm going to say for the Pathfinder 2e players here, while Mystic is an incredibly solid class, I would not necessarily say Mystic is better than like some of its similar counterparts. Bard, for instance, you have focus cantrips, so you can swap up what bonuses your team needs on the fly without needing to worry about you expending your focus points, which is very good. With Cleric, for instance, clerics just get more spell slots at their highest spell rank, and they're used for heal spells typically, sometimes harm spells, but the heal spells are nuts. They're typically like an 80% heal to your allies, where as long as they're any more than 20% of their HP up, they're going to be pretty much maxed out. It's insane. So on like a pure healing capacity, I would say clerics are the same, if not better potentially, as long as you're not running more than like 3 combats per day, which is a lot of combats to have, not unlikely. And even then, like, your pure healing output is just so much higher. On the Druid end, I don't know, because Druids in Pathfinder 2e don't do anything super special other than having animal companions. And what Mystic can't have an animal companion, so I guess there's something to say about that. But, yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't even compare the two because they don't really do any of the same kind of things. So the Mystic is good. I would say it's really good. I really like the Mystic, and honestly, I would be very tempted to play a Mystic because I love playing a support. A support healer like this, where you can kind of just be like in the back managing the party, providing aid in all kinds of ways, especially with the different connections and what their epiphany spells are, makes the Mystic a very tempting offer. But like I said, let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. But that's going to be it for me. Thank you all so much for watching. If you like this content, please leave a like and subscribe. Every like helps the genre of TTRPGs get out there. The more we interact with videos, the more these videos get shown to other people, and the more other people discover new games and discover the games that we all love and play. So even if it's not my videos, I highly recommend liking and interacting with videos from other TTRPG channels as well, as I want the hobby to flourish and succeed even more than it already is, which is saying something. And if you want to see all the stuff I talk about with TTRPGs, whether it's Starfinder, Pathfinder, Cosmere RPG, please subscribe. I'm going to be doing my best to provide the content you're looking for in my favorite hobby. Anyway, thank you all so much for watching. Good luck with your games. Leave the bad luck to me, and I'll see y'all next time. Bye.